Hey all, welcome to Elysis Notes. I'm Nimisha Salin, second year English literature student of KE College Mananam. Today, we are going to deal with the poem Lycidas from Module 1 of Symphony of Verse. Before we begin with the poem, let's take a quick look at the author. John Milton was born on 9 December 1608. He was a student at Cambridge University. He is best known for his work Paradise Lost. He was a major Puritan poet. This poem is a pastoral elegy, or we can also call it as monody. Lycidas here is a stand-in for Edward King. Both of them were in the same university. Edward King had died in an unfortunate shipwreck. This poem laments his death. In pastoral elegy, the poet borrows the classical convention of representing its subject as an idealized shepherd. This poem is divided into six main parts, one monologue, four sections, and an epilogue. This elegy is highly criticized for its digression. Digression means a temporary departure from its main subject. Here, Milton twice digresses from his subject. The first section that serves as a prologue, we can see that the speaker is trying to invoke the muse and explains for writing the poem. Here, the speaker is seen talking to some plants and collecting leaves for a funeral. He plucks berries and ivy that have not yet ripened, killing them before their season. After violently collecting leaves, the speaker decides to write an elegy. He invokes the muses to fill him with song as pastoral poets like Theocritus and Virgil do at the beginning of their own poem. He further explains the reason for writing this elegy. Bitter constraint and sad occasion compels him to write. This occasion is the untimely death of his beloved friend Lycidas, who is Edward King. He died before his time by drowning in the sea. Lycidas is dead and he hasn't left us with anyone who is as good as him. Then the speaker comes up with a rhetorical question and asks who would not sing song for Lycidas. It is highly impossible, and according to him, Lycidas' death must be lamented. He must receive a fitting reward. He should not remain unwept while floating in the ocean, which is his watery tomb. Metamorphically, the water being his grave. So with the end of each slides, I have added the summary for the previous. You can pause the video and read it out. In the next part of the prologue, the speaker tries to invoke the sisters of the sacred well. It is reference to the nine muses, who were ancient Greek mythological women thought to inspire the poetry. The speaker needs an inspiration to write, so he is hoping that muses will help him play the music. So he says that let me compose this particular poem without any useless denial or excuses. Also, he's hopeful that someday in the future, somebody else too would write such a poem for him. Then comes the rural imagery in the following line. For we were nursed upon the selfsame hill, fled the same flock by fountain, shade, and rill. Here, we understand that both the Lycidas and the speaker grew in the same countryside and flocked the same sheep by the fountain, shade, and streams. The speaker continues to describe his past life with Lycidas at Cambridge. Their experiences are allegorized through pastoral idioms. They'd be out before the dawn, shepherding their flock. When morning comes, they hear the sound of grey fly, which indicates the sun is up and hot. It shows that both of them are inseparable and had spent much of their time together. Their studies are likened to the shepherd's work of driving a field and battening flocks. Rough satyrs and fawns with loven hail refer to their classmates. The rural ditties and Theoton flute refers to the merry time that they had together. Even old Dematius would love to hear this song. That is, even their professor would love to hear their song. The poem then notes the heavy change suffered by nature now that Lycidas is gone. He says, Lycidas, your death has affected the natural world, the caves which have overgrown with wild thyme and gading wine, and the woods mourns his death. Even the willows and the hazel trees are down in the dumps, since Lycidas is dead. Their leaves are in shaking to the tune of his poetry. Lycidas' death was a very unfortunate event to the speaker. He compares it to the canker disease that infects the rose plants, to the intestinal worms that kills young calves, and is as deadly as frost is to blooming. Moving ahead, he then addresses the nymphs and wonder where they were when Lycidas needed them. He brings it to the notice that while Lycidas was drowning, the nymphs weren't doing their usual activities. Otherwise, they would have been on the mountain, island of fields, on the riverside. In another rhetorical questions, he explains his readers that it would be futile to blame these nymphs. Even if they would have been there, could have done nothing to save him. As an evidence, he talks about the Calliope who couldn't save her own son. So, how can he expect the muses to save his beloved friend Lycidas? The next section starts with the unhappy poet questioning the shepherd life that he is living. He asks himself what gain he would have meditating these thankless muse. He questions whether poetry can actually achieve anything. He says instead of being a shepherd, why not sport with the muses? Answering to his own question, he says that people work hard in order to gain fame. Milton takes the liberty to make a digression. The first digression is on fame. He questions the purpose of life. He knows it's hard to be a poet, and for that, he must work hard. But what if the human life ends? What is the point of his hard work? But his doubt soon ends when God Apollo approaches him and assures him a greater reward in the heaven, which would be rewarded by Jove. In line 55, the speaker addresses the fountain and the river and says that Apollo's speech was of a higher mood. He then says that he is continuing his song. As a result of invoking the muse, next comes the god Triton, and he defends Neptune, the god of the sea. He asks the winds and the weathers. He asks them what happened to Lycidas, the gentle swain. He also asks the wings blowing from pointed promontories, but they knew nothing about Lycidas' story. Even Hippocrates justifies himself that he had all his wind stored in a cave, so there was no chance of him being involved. Panop, the sky god, was seen playing in the calm sea. At last, the deceitful ship is blamed for Lycidas' death. The ship was cursed as it was built during the eclipse, which is considered as a bad omen. The next to come to the procession is Camus or the river Cam. He is seen lamenting the death of Lycidas and wants to know who took him away. The Cam is then personified as a student who is wearing the academic gown and bonnet sedge, which is actually a plant that grows near water. The bonnet is compared to hyacinth. The last to arrive was St. Peter, the pilot of the Galilean lake. He is one of Jesus' disciples. He is carrying two keys. Gold leads to the heaven and iron leads to the hell. His hairs are stuffed under a cap. He was supposed to give a speech on Lycidas' funeral, but instead he starts talking about corrupt clergymen. Here comes the second digression of the poem. He says there are three types of corrupted clergies in the church. Some creep, some intrude, and some climb into the fold. Those who climb into the fold do not care for office or name, but are cunning. Those who intrude are lazy, and those who climb are selfish and ambitious. The bad shepherds refer to bad religious leaders who don't care about their flocks and care more about fattening their bellies. They don't care about anything else but scrambling food at the feast and forcing out the invited ones. St. Peter continues that they are blindly led by the desire to feed their mouths. They even don't know how to hold a sheep hook or anything that a shepherd must know. They don't care about the inabilities. They have what they wanted and they are satisfied. When they choose to sing, they sing songs that sound terrible and grating when they play them on the squeaky pipes. Their inadequacy is further shown in their inability to handle their sheep. The sheep are hungry and are fed with winds rather than good grasses. As a result, they are wasting away and spreading diseases. The sheep are being attacked by wolves and the shepherds watches them apathetically. He says some 200 engine is ready to cut down the bad shepherds for good. This could be a reference to the Roman Catholic churches, which Milton is of hatred. Milton reassures that the unworthy members of the clergy in England will pay the price for their corruption eventually. Once St. Peter is done with his speech, the speaker calls back Alpheus, the river god, who had peaced out by saying he had shrunk his streams. Well, it refers to a Greek mythological story where Alpheus falls in love with one of the nymphs. But Diana, the goddess of virginity, turns into streams and goes underground along with Alpheus and re emerges in Sicily. He also appeals to the Sicilian muse and asks her to tell the winds to send flowers in all kinds of colors. Here, the poet is again invoking the muses that inspired some of the world's very first pastoral poems. He then addresses valleys with beautiful shades, winds, and brooks, and which often has whispers. He tells them to cast their eyes where he is looking, perhaps towards Lycidas. The speaker asks these valleys to toss around their eyes, which means he wants these valleys to spread their beautiful many colored eye of flowers. These suck the sweet rainwater from the green turf and make the ground look purple with spring flowers. He then tells the valleys to bring the ripening primrose, the wild hyacinth, jasmine, and the pansy. But these blooms are streaked with black, which is a sign of mourning. He also tells them to bring the violet, the woodbine, and pale cowslips that seems to be hanging their heads in sadness, the ones that wear sad embroidery. Here, the speaker asks Amaranthus to shed its beauty and the daffodils to shed tears. The speaker wants all those flowers to be decorated on Lycidas' coffin. Further in the poem, he says that he must engage with the false sunrise, which is the act of strewing Lycidas' coffin with all those flowers, as his body is beneath the water. Next, he elaborates the fact that Lycidas' body is missing. He says, while the seas and shores wash your body far away, wherever your bones hold, whether that be beyond the stormy Hebrides, where you might be underneath the ocean and visiting a realm of sea monsters, or whether, despite our tearful prayers, you're sleeping by the fables of Belarus, from where one can see Namankos and Bayona's hold. I want you, angel, to look homeward and feel sad. He asks the dolphins to help Lycidas, the unlucky, to drift along safely. Moving on, this section of the poem basically talks about Lycidas coming back to life. There is a Christian concept of resurrection here. Let's look into it. So the lines starts by the speaker comforting his fellow shepherds, and he asks them to stop crying because Lycidas is not really dead. Just like the sun soon rises after setting, similarly Lycidas too shall rise. In the lines, so sings the day star in the ocean bed, and yet Anand repairs his drooping head. We can see that the sun is personified here, and it says that very soon the sun would repair its drooping head. He further says that when the sun rises, it adorns his beams with newly sparkled gold. Then the speaker continues that Lycidas might have sunken low, but he will definitely mount high, which means that Lycidas has risen to a place resembling to heaven. It was the power of Jesus Christ that helped him pave the path. Now that Lycidas is in heaven, he spends his time among the groves and along the streets. He washes his slimy hairs with the nectar of paradise. There he hears an unexpressive wedding song. And when Lycidas gets sad for dying too soon, the saints comes to his aid. The speaker at last addresses Lycidas and tells him that we shepherd weep no more for you, as they have comforted themselves to believe that he will rise again. And they have faith that Lycidas would protect all the sailors from the terrifying ocean, and that becoming a savior is Lycidas' reward for dying. So now we have arrived at the climax of the poem. Let's begin. Thus sang the uncaught swan to the oaks and rills, while the still morn went out with sandals grey. He touched the tender stops of various quills, with eager thought wobbling his Doric lay. In this epilogue, it is revealed to the readers that all this while it wasn't the writer who was speaking, but some unknown shepherd. And the line says that the unknown shepherd is singing to the oaks and the streams, and it is about to be known. Also, while singing, this shepherd is playing an instrument. The last few lines goes by, and now the sun had stretched out all the hills, and now was dropped into the western bay. At last he rose, and twitched his mantle blue, tomorrow to fresh woods and pastures new. In these lines, we can see the image of a beautiful evening. The sun here is personified and it's set to dropping into the western bay. That is, the sun is setting in the west. Also, the shepherd is now set on a new journey. He moves on to fresh woods and new pastures. So, this poem ends on a hopeful note.
It shows a determination both to face life hopefully and to rise up to a greater poetic achievements.
So that's all about our poem. In next few slides, I have listed few poetic devices, but you can find more from the poem. So here ends our today's session. Thank you for your patient listening.